Well, I would say one of the dramatic changes has been in the career options available for somebody studying biomedical science, generally biology, life
Right.
science. When I started in graduate school in 1970, there was only one career option really. That was as an academic, that was my intention, and everyone, all of my classmates, expected to do the same. There were, of course, in other disciplines, particularly in chemistry, there were positions in industry, but that just wasn't an option in cell and molecular biology. But then, um, shortly after I started graduate school, and certainly when I started at Berkeley, the biotech industry was born, and that has grown enormously, continues to grow. And now there are enormous opportunities in biotech and startup companies and sort of mid-level companies and established companies. In fact, I would say the majority of our PhD students and postdocs go into biotech, and the options there are very attractive, not just financially, but also rewarding in a sense of being able to contribute one's knowledge and experience in something useful. So there were, some years ago, there were calls by very prominent people to cut back on the PhD training in biomedical science because of the lack of career options, and they were always just referring to academic career options. But I didn't take that view because the biotech world is enormous, and with this new pandemic, I think the opportunities are going to be gain strength again. The opportunities for drug discovery to deal with infectious disease are there, and I think the government's going to have to recognize that and contribute essential to that mission, because biotech and pharma simply can't afford to go after drugs for diseases that are going to die off. So I mean, this SARS-CoV-2 will eventually be treatable by vaccine or drugs. The incidence of infection will go down. The drugs will not, unlike you know oncology, the drugs will not be used on a regular basis.
Right.
But they will be. There's no doubt that there'll be another incident of zoonotic transmission of another coronavirus or something else, and unless we work ahead of time to ward off those kinds of infections, we will suffer once again with the trauma that we have now. So I think, and so that's been enormous change. Well, that's perfectly rational for a drug company, but yet scientists who are in drug companies, particularly in biotech, still enjoy publishing their work. Of course, after patents have been issued and things like that. But a company like Genentech, very big, very successful company, has a very strong emphasis on publishing work of the work that's done at the company. And big pharma maybe less so, but the more insightful biotech companies do encourage that. What I'd like to see is more industry academia collaboration on those big challenges for drug discovery, and it's happening. It's happening, but I mean, I'll give you an example relevant to the current pandemic. The SARS epidemic broke out in Hong Kong 18 years ago. And unlike SARS-CoV-2, SARS-1 was not infectious without symptoms, so it could be contained, and it died out. And then 10 years later, the MERS epidemic in the Middle East, and that was even that virus is very poorly transmitted, so that died out too. And so while there certainly has been an effort to understand these viruses from a basic point of view, the funding for that has been limited. The interest has been limited because there's no market for it. And so, since these two epidemics, SARS and MERS, subsided so quickly, there was no market for drugs.
Yeah.
And yet, people who were isolating coronaviruses from bats found thousands of different variants. And it didn't take a leap of imagination to appreciate that this was going to happen. And, you know, who knows, the next one might have been easily contained as well, but unfortunately not. So my view is we'll likely have a vaccine that will work well enough, you know, by next year. But the next coronavirus that emerges in 10 years or wherever will be immunologically distinct.
Right.
And the vaccine won't work. And that's because the coat proteins mutate quite substantially. But the core machinery encoded by the viral genome can't mutate so dramatically to sustain replication. Mm-hmm. And therefore, those genes, I think, are targets for therapeutics. And I would compare it to HIV.
Right. Yeah.
Where there's never been a vaccine and may never be. But boy, the drugs that, you know, again, that was a public-private commitment because, you know, AIDS is a 100% certain death. So it was a disaster, but it took a long time, but now can be effectively controlled. And I think the same would have been true for coronavirus had there been a public-private commitment to continue drug discovery. So anyway, but you know, the drug companies have to have intellectual property. You know, AZT, which was the first drug to treat HIV, that was developed through NIH funding.
Right.
But the principle of the NIH is if you do something in your laboratory through NIH funding, the government doesn't claim any patent royalties. So you can patent, and you have to share the royalties with your institution. But this really has encouraged basic scientists to become more entrepreneurial, and that's been a good thing, I think. But for the big challenges in infectious disease, there's no substitute for the two working together. And you know what the NIH has done in the past is to try to encourage basic scientists to do drug discovery in their own laboratories. Right. But that, you know, basic scientists aren't equipped to do that generally. They don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the experience. They can identify targets. They can get compounds that, you know, are partly effective. But the pharmaceutical industry really has to do the lion's share of development.
Right. I was really quite shocked when I first stepped into Novartis to see the process of research, because it's quite different from what happens in academic research lab. There's very little project ownership. It's more assembly line style.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't call it, well, maybe Novartis. The biotech companies that I'm familiar with, it's all about the team. Whereas in academic science, it's all about the individual. I mean, each professor has a group, but you know, typically each member of a laboratory in an academic lab has his or her own project. But in pharmaceutical industry and biotech, it's all about the team effort. And that's something that's really missing, unfortunately, I would say, in academic science. And I think it's because the reward structure in academic science favors the individual.